Hello and welcome to Viewpoint. I'm Vladimir Solokhub. Join me now to discuss the outcome of the Davos Forum for Ukraine is Deputy Head of Presidential Administration, Mr. Dmytro Shymkiv. Mr. Shymkiv, welcome to Viewpoint.
Welcome. Thank you.
Mr. Shymkiv, you were one of the member of the official delegation of Ukraine to the Davos Forum. The Davos is now over. The time has passed. So what are the results for Ukraine following this meeting of the world leaders?
I think what's the main achievements for Ukraine during Davos was the recognition of the progress on the reforms that Ukraine did. And I think that's very important because the joint assessment of multiple leaders we met and discussed in corridors was about the glass is half full, which is about optimist. People recognize what's done. At the same time, they also articulate the areas where we need to improve, things like anti-corruption, judicial reform, etc. But what is more important is that they recognize the progress that the current government, the president, did. And this is a set of reforms related to, as I say, establish anti-corruption bodies, significant deregulation, stabilization of financial system, gas reforms in many sectors. So there is introduction of the electronic procurement. And what is more important is also recognizing the investments that are taking place in certain sectors. For example, high-tech technology, take into account the theme for Davos, the fourth revolution. Ukraine was very in the theme, take into account the set of events that took place during the last year.
Mr. Shymkiv, I'm glad that you've mentioned the judicial reform, because a lot of experts, both in Ukraine and abroad, say that the Ukrainian reforms will not work in the best way possible if Ukraine does not reform its judiciary. And so far, we haven't seen that. What is being done by the presidential administration, by other bodies, to reform the judiciary?
Well, back in February, we passed the law on fair judgment, fair court. And this is what is very important. We introduced a set of new principles. Just to name, for example, video recording in the courtrooms are being introduced and become mandatory. So this is something that's being introduced. What is even more, the development for the constitutional changes in the part of judicial reform have been passed the first reading. They went through the assessment of the Venice Commission, and the Constitutional Court made a decision on it. What the reform is introducing, absolutely new principle and approach to selecting judges, assessing judges, introducing standards for ethical and professionals for the judges, and that's a very important milestone, because what we've been warned by European expert and international expert is that, and as well as Venice Commission, a very clear sign is saying, if you start firing, some countries already did it in Europe. And then what happened in some of these countries? The judges applied to the European courts, and they've been reinstated in the position. And the friendly advice from a lot of experts was, don't go that way. Go through the procedures which will allow you, through the legislative progress, actually replace judges through assessment and introducing absolutely new criteria, which will be more about ethics, how the judges make money, where they get the income.
In your opinion, how long will it take to get the new people on the benches?
Well, I think that the very first step is adoption of the constitutional changes in the judicial area, which is we expecting is to happen this or next week. And next step is to pass a few additional laws, and then we can go into the full execution. What is very also important is, and we discussed this with many friends from the European Union, is establishing a system where we can actually, all of us, can check the judges. So we can have a dossier on the judge. What's their income, how they live, what their courts, what's their decisions, what their complaints. So there's kind of public profile of the judge. So we can clearly understand who are the judges. And what is very important, to ensure the judges, the judge vertical, the court vertical, is absolutely independent. And this is also important.
So talking time-wise?
Time-wise, we're looking into that. During the 2016 is the year where this must take place. This is a joint agreement across all stakeholders in Ukrainian establishment, and this is also assessment of everybody with whom we've been engaged during Davos, as well as my visit in Brussels.
Okay, let's go back to Davos.
Sure.
During the forum, the finance minister Yaresko made a statement which was initially made by the President Poroshenko that in 2016 Ukraine wants to put together an international negotiations group to return the Crimea. A few days ago, there was a press conference of Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov, who said basically there is nothing to return. So what gave the President Poroshenko in the first place confidence to make this statement?
Well, very clear. If you look at their international coalition and the rhetorics and the statements that's been done by US, Europe, the international partners, they're very clear. Crimea is Ukrainian territory, illegally annexed by Russia. Full stop. Several sanctions, a lot of sanctions to the Russian politicians have been listing and stating Crimea as a criteria. So that's why we're putting things on the table, and we're pushing an international coalition to fight with Mr. Putin to actually get back the Crimea. We fully understand the Russian rhetorics. We understand it's going to be a long discussion and long, because nobody wants to see the violence. But what we want to have is a legal process. And Russia is very famous for producing lies. We've been experiencing Davos, different statements, different press, etc. So I think we are confident that we are kicking off the very important process to actually make sure that Crimea is back to Ukraine.
But how do you make sure that Russia even sits on that negotiations table?
Well,
you can't force them, right?
Well, look, sanctions work. Sanctions work. Sanctions bring Russia to the table. Economic sanction is what really works in Russia. And they're doing everything possible and impossible to make sure they jump out of that hook. And our job, and the job of all people who defend the international laws and international practice of guaranteeing sovereignty to Ukrainian state, is to make sure that Crimea remains on the agenda for international community.
Understood. Let's go back to the let's go to the IT, Mr. Shymkiv. You come from the IT background. When you joined the government, you were trying to get the presidential administration staff to start using emails, which was something new for them. And during the statement, President Poroshenko said that development and support of the IT industry is one of the top priorities for Ukraine. So what is being done, or what is on the agenda of the presidential administration in terms of supporting the IT industry?
Let me give you some glimpse, because for the viewers, just to highlight of Ukrainian high-tech industry. 2015 been very successful. Luxury was acquired for 155 million. Oracle acquired Maximizer. Soros made his first ever commercial investment into Ukraine in its IT, its outsourcing company Cyclum. We got in EBRD investing into deposit photos with $1 million into the equity. We're talking about augmented pixels, get investment from the big venture funds from California. There's more and more to this. Ericsson opening research centers and so on. So we've seen...
I'm sorry, let me interrupt you here. At the same time, in 2015,
sure,
there were at least 12 government raids on the IT companies, and the IT industry experts say this is totally unacceptable, this is totally devastating, because the sole purpose of these government raids were shakedowns.
I want to make it very clear. The way how some of them being done is absolutely unacceptable. And that's why it's reached the priority of the president. The president give his statement. But what I would like also to say, there is a couple of companies, and there is the cases in courts, which been hosting separatist sites, which is, again, evidence. Their IP addresses is there. It's been hosted. They have documents that have been hosting this. There are some companies who've been doing financial transactions, technically, with separatists, financing them. So these are also technical companies, but they've been doing things which, in any country in the world, will be considered a violation of the law.
No, that's totally understandable.
These companies, I would like to separate in this. But there was some... The areas where we've seen absolutely unacceptable areas was usually it was the tax authorities and police. The security service, in all... when this happened and happened to be from the IT industry, I looked in every case. So I met with the people who've been doing this, and I can tell you that there are areas where absolutely things fine. The question is how security services communicating this. This is also unacceptable. But there are many areas where we need to address. And what's been done last year? First, we passed the law which actually enabled courts to to talk, if there is a need for seize of data, there should be a request for copying data. Unfortunately, courts continue to do this practice where they seize the data. So now there is a law in the parliament, which is drafted by the deputies, where we would like to actually prohibit taking away the hardware and the servers. On top of it, we are currently investigating, taking into account the, of course, limitation of Ukrainian budget, what we can do to stimulate activities of Ukrainian businesses and attracting investments into Ukrainian startup community, bringing up famous experts and people to give training, for example, speeches and information on technological entrepreneurship, etc. Give you another example. Ukraine joined Horizon 2020. That's an opportunity for R&D projects leveraging $80 billion that are available from the European Union. We passed a new law on their science and on science, and that's primary, which actually introducing a lot of new tools.
Going back
Yes.
to these rates, again, I spoke to the industry experts, and they said that the people who are behind these rates, and we were talking here about the rates, which were the main goal of it was the shakedown. So we're not talking about legitimate rates,
Sure.
which is totally fine. So
Absolutely.
they said that the people who are behind these rates were not brought to justice. Not only they were not punished, but they were not even fired. Why is this happening?
So when we're looking into the cases by cases, when the investigation is taking place, and I know there's probably not 3 minutes discussion, but let me give you the way how tax authority looks at some of the transaction, how some of IT business operates in Ukraine, the business absolutely legit model. From the transaction standpoint, looks very similar to money laundering. Very similar, but from the transaction standpoint. But IT is fully legit. That's why they're going into kind of their team, trying to make issuing a request to the court. And the court gives them the permit to seize the equipment. And then the behavior of some of the people who go and do in search is unacceptable. The way how they...
So why these people are still working for the government?
It's a discretion of the agencies that are currently doing. We made a very clear appeal to the people who are running this agency to do an internal investigation and behavioral checks on that people. So making sure that they have disciplinary actions and, if necessary, fine.
When the investigation will be over? When we will see justice for these people, brought on these people?
Firing the person in any institution requires certain procedures. In Ukrainian labor code is very strict on the conditions and the conditionality when people can be fired. And that's why, in order to have a proper statement in terms of firing, you have a set of things. If the actions that have been done and they've been acting within legitimate things, the fact that these legitimate things being structured or constructed in the way that they've been undermining Ukrainian business, there is no laws that actually can... You need to have absolutely different evidence for that.
Yeah, it looks like some legal technicalities.
Yes, no, of course.
Allow these people stay
to
wiggle the way.
But what is more important, the problem has been reached at a high level. Now, the top executives in the state, looking at the situation, they put IT on their radar to make sure things are under control, that the people who've been using this as a way to get their small bribes, etc. What I can tell that the IT people should do everything possible to, the moment that somebody knocks on their door with some weird request, make sure the public hears this.
And that's very good, and that's why we're bringing this topic as well. Mr. Shymkiv, as always, very nice talking to you. Mr. Dmytro Shymkiv, the Deputy Head of Presidential Administration. We were discussing the summit of the world leaders in Davos and its outcome for Ukraine, as well as Ukraine's support for its IT industry, with Deputy Head of Presidential Administration of Ukraine, Mr. Dmytro Shymkiv. I'm Vladimir Solhub. Thank you for watching Viewpoint.